I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to Outside Source. Lawyers for Prince Andrew argue in court that the sexual assault civil lawsuit against him should be thrown out. They say he can't be sued because of an agreement signed by his accuser. More records have been broken for daily coronavirus infections. The US is registering more than 1 million new cases, while the UK has surpassed 200,000 for the first time. And earlier, we heard from Boris Johnson.
We have a good chance of getting through the Omicron wave without the need for further restrictions and without the need, certainly, for a lockdown.
We'll be live in Cape Town, where a man has appeared in court suspected of setting South Africa's parliament on fire. And we'll talk about Novak Djokovic, the men's tennis world number one, is heading to the Australian Open. He's been granted a medical exemption from requiring a COVID vaccine. Prince Andrew's lawyers have been trying to convince a US judge to dismiss the sexual assault civil lawsuit against him. They say his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, can't sue because of damages she accepted in 2009 from the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein in return for dropping her claims against him and any other potential defendant. Prince Andrew has consistently denied her allegations. Now let's update you on the pandemic. The UK has reported another record daily number of COVID infections, 218,000 this time, though there's been some backlog in reporting because of Christmas. That needs to be factored in. Earlier on, Boris Johnson led a press conference. Now, millions of pupils across England and Northern Ireland have gone back to school today, as lots of you watching on the BBC News channel will know. In England, secondary students will have to take COVID tests at school and masks are being reintroduced. Let's get more from the BBC's education editor, Branwen Jeffries. Now straight to the US, because President Biden is receiving a briefing on the pandemic and he's making remarks as well.
To about 35 million in the past 6 months.
Well, this feed, as you can tell, has gone quiet after Joe Biden made those initial statements about the situation with the pandemic, and the camera person seems to be changing their camera angle as well. We were expecting to hear some of that briefing. The president was being joined by several leading scientists who were going to brief him and everyone watching on the state of the pandemic. But we already know the headline statistics around the state of the pandemic. America has now set the highest daily total of COVID cases for any country since the start of the pandemic, clear of 1 million cases. This surge is very much being blamed on the Omicron variant, as you would expect. It's a surge that we're seeing replicated, albeit not to that degree, in lots of countries around the world. And actually, there were echoes between what we heard from Boris Johnson a little earlier on that record number of cases in the UK. The Prime Minister saying, please get your booster shot. If you haven't got vaccinated at all, please get a vaccine, emphasising the importance of the vaccines. We heard the same there from Joe Biden. The UK and the US have slightly different policies on which children should get vaccinated, but we heard President Biden saying, if your child is eligible, please give them the jab. If they're too young to be eligible, please surround them by people who are vaccinated. But of course, the question for President Biden and the question for Prime Minister Johnson is they have been pushing these messages for some time, and if they are not those messages on their own enough, then there'll be further questions as to what should be done. We'll be back with you in a couple of minutes' time. Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to Outside Source. Lawyers for Prince Andrew are arguing in court that the sexual assault civil lawsuit against him should be thrown out. They say he can't be sued because of an agreement signed by his accuser. The US has registered more than 1 million new coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours. That's a new global record for daily infections. President Biden is once again urging Americans to get booster shots. We're going to be live in Cape Town in a moment, where a man's appeared in court suspected of setting fire to South Africa's parliament. And we'll report on the situation in Sudan. Security forces there have fired tear gas at the first major pro-democracy protest since the civilian prime minister resigned a couple of days back. And we'll talk about Novak Djokovic, the world #1 men's tennis player. He's going to the Australian Open because he's been granted a medical exemption from requiring a COVID vaccine. Well, let's go to South Africa. A man's appeared in court accused of setting the Parliament building in Cape Town on fire. Here is the suspect in court earlier. He was remanded in custody for a week. The prosecution is saying he was found at the site with explosives. His lawyer says he's innocent and the police have arrested the wrong person. Now, let's turn back to the US. We heard from President Biden a few minutes ago. He was saying that COVID cases are rising fast in the United States, which of course we know from the data. They're even rising at the White House, we're told. And he's urging Americans to get booster shots, just as Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in the UK. Bear in mind, the US yesterday registered more than 1 million new coronavirus cases in one day. That's a global record for daily infections in one country. Well, let's switch from Washington to France, because its most famous set of twins have died of coronavirus within days of each other. Krishka and Igor Bogdanov were famous eccentrics in France. They hosted a TV science show in the 1980s. They were very much part of French public life for the rest of their lives after that. Krishka, here on the right, died on the 28th of December, and Igor died on Monday. Well, stay with us here on Outside Source. In a few minutes' time, we're going to have the latest on Novak Djokovic. He's the men's world #1 in tennis, and he is going to be in the Australian Open because he's been granted a medical exemption from requiring a COVID vaccine. I'm Ros Atkins with Outside Source. We're here in the BBC newsroom. Our lead story comes from the US, where a judge is considering whether to throw out a sexual assault case against Britain's Prince Andrew, brought by a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, police in Washington, D.C. have been speaking about the security measures they have in place ahead of the anniversary this week of last year's riot at the Capitol. These images, of course, are very hard to forget. This was January the 6th last year, when a huge crowd of supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the building that houses both houses of Congress. Right, time to talk about men's world #1, Novak Djokovic. He's received a medical exemption to enter Australia and play in the Australian Open. This will bypass strict rules that only allow vaccinated people to enter the country. The exemption means that Djokovic, who has been critical of mandatory vaccines, can now compete in the Australian Open. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like further reports from me and the Outside Source team, you can find them in lots of places on the BBC. If you're watching in the UK, there are a whole array of our reports in the news section of iPlayer. You can subscribe to audio versions of our explainers on the BBC Sounds app, and wherever you're watching, you'll find lots of them on the BBC News website too. That is it for this edition. Thank you very much indeed for watching. See you tomorrow. All the best. I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to Outside Source. Lawyers for Prince Andrew are arguing in court that the sexual assault civil lawsuit against him should be thrown out. They say he can't be sued because of an agreement signed by his accuser. The US has registered more than 1 million new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours, setting a new global record for daily infections. President Biden is continuing to urge Americans to get a booster shot. The UK has also set a new record, surpassing 200,000 daily cases for the first time. And Boris Johnson has this message.
We have a good chance of getting through the Omicron wave without the need for further restrictions and without the need, certainly, for a lockdown.
And men's tennis number one, Novak Djokovic, is going to the Australian Open after being granted a medical exemption from requiring a COVID vaccine. Prince Andrew's lawyers have been trying to convince a US judge to dismiss the sexual assault civil lawsuit against him. They say his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, can't sue because of damages she accepted in 2009 from the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein in return for dropping her claims against him and any other potential defendant. Prince Andrew's consistently denied her allegations. Our royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond, has more. Well, we turn back to the US, but this time to talk about the pandemic. America has now registered more than 1 million new coronavirus cases in one day. That's a global record for daily infections in any one country. And we heard from President Biden a few minutes ago. So record case numbers in the US, record case numbers in the UK too, which has now released a record daily number of cases since the pandemic started, 218,000 today, though we should say there's some backlog in reporting because of Christmas, and that needs to be factored in. Earlier on, Boris Johnson held a press conference. Now, stay with me here on Outside Source. In a few minutes, I'll have the latest on Novak Djokovic. He is heading to Australia. He's going to play in the Australian Open. He's only doing so because he's been granted a medical exemption from requiring a COVID vaccine, which hasn't impressed everyone. Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. We're here with Outside Source in the BBC Newsroom. Our lead story is that a US judge is considering whether to throw out a sexual assault case against Britain's Prince Andrew, brought by a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, police in Washington, D.C. have been speaking about the security measures they have in place ahead of the anniversary this week of last January's riot at the Capitol. These images are, of course, hard to forget. This was January the 6th last year, when a huge crowd of supporters of Donald Trump stormed the building that houses the US Congress. They were seeking to overturn the election result. I always want to listen to anything Gabriel does, and this series, The Coming Storm, is available right now on BBC Sounds. You can hear all 8 episodes right away. That is bbc.com/sounds. Or if you have a smartphone, the best bet is to download the BBC Sounds app and you'll locate it very easily. Now let's talk about tennis, because the world number one in the men's game, Novak Djokovic, has received a medical exemption to enter Australia. This will allow him to bypass strict rules that say only vaccinated people can come into the country. And that means that he can play in the Australian Open. Thanks to Phil for that. That ends this edition of Outside Source. Thanks as ever for watching. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. More information on all the stories we cover on the BBC News website. But for the moment, bye-bye.
Hello there. The first few days of 2022 were very mild across the bulk of